G'day, my name's Blake Bailey, Land Services Officer for Upper Hunter Strategic Weeds. And this introduction is coming to you from inside one of our Hunter region's priority containment weeds, African olive. African olive is a tropical wild olive from Eastern Asia that was first introduced to Australia in the 1800s as rootstock for edible olives and also as a hedging plant. Since then, it has escaped throughout New South Wales, with the worst two infestations being around southwest Sydney and the central Hunter Valley. African olive trees are a problem because they invade bushland and produce dense shade that suppresses native understory plants. They can permanently change the plant diversity in the bushland. They harbour diseases and pests of commercial olives, and the worst part is they don't even have edible fruit. How rude's that? African olive can grow from 5 to 10 metres tall.
And in terms of diameter, it can grow up to 10 metres wide, but you'll most likely see it like this, forming dense thickets underneath other trees, power lines, or along fence lines.
So, by now you may be thinking, gee Blake, that looks an awful lot like an olive that I have planted in my orchard or my grove. And you wouldn't be wrong. African olive looks incredibly similar to the common olive, two varieties of native mock olives, and also to the feral olive, another weed, which honestly has some pretty similar impacts. So, let me teach you how to tell them apart. When looking at the leaves of African olives, they'll be opposite, with green glossy tops and a light greenish brownish underside. Now, if this was a common edible olive, this would actually be a silvery grey underneath. Now, to tell the difference between African olive and the two native mock olives, Nodalea venosa and Nodalea longfolia, we again look at the leaves. African olives typically had leaves between 6 to 10 centimetres long and 10 to 25 millimetres wide. Both of the mock olives will be much larger than this with a leathery texture. And to boot, Nodalea longfolia actually has hairy leaves. Another distinguishing feature of the African olive are actually these hooked tips on the ends of the leaves. You don't find those on the common edible olive. Juvenile plants have smooth or slightly ribbed stems when younger, but adults will be covered in rough, light or dark grey bark when older.
African olive flowers during spring and summer, and the flowers themselves have 4 petals. They're a yellow to white creamy colour, 2 to 4 millimetres in diameter, and on a short stem. Now, the fruit of African olives are another distinguishing feature of the species. As a general rule of thumb, they tend to be much smaller at 15 millimetres long to 6 millimetres wide, compared to the European or feral olive at 30 millimetres long to 20 millimetres wide. The single seed inside is brown and 10 to 15 millimetres long, so they do take up the majority of the space inside the fruit, meaning that the African olive fruits are far less fleshy, they're much harder than European or feral olives. They're green with white spots when they're unripe and purple-black when ripe. You can also look at the base of the fruit that has a sharp tip in some cases, making it more pointed than oval-shaped when compared to the European or feral olives. Birds are the main cause of spread when it comes to African olive, and because of its shade tolerance, it will happily grow in the dense shade and understory of other trees, outcompeting native plants, dominating that forest and woodland understory, and thereby reducing native plant biodiversity.
If mechanical removal is viable in your use case, just be careful, as the African olive, when damaged, can produce suckers. If you'd like to learn more about how to effectively control African olive on your land, the local Land Services is partnering with Mac Energy, the CSIRO, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Bengalla Mining Company, Rapid Spray, Hunter Region Landcare Network, and the Upper Hunter Weed Authority to bring you a free Woody Weeds workshop this October in Muswellbrook. Learn about what works, what doesn't, and see first-hand demonstrations on how woody weeds like African olive can be controlled. But for more information in the meantime on control, identification, and registered herbicides, check out New South Wales Weedwise, reach out to your local council biosecurity weeds officer for advice, or reach out to us at your nearest local Land Services.